Devin, thank you so much for being here today and joining me on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
I'm excited to be here too. And what I'm more excited about, honestly, is your new book that is coming out. And it is called Transforming Toddlerhood, Your Essential Guide for Ages 1 to 5. And I love the bottom part, honestly, the subtitle. It says, How to Handle Tantrums, End Power Struggles, and Raise Resilient Kids Without Losing Your Mind. I mean, that's if any parent sees this on the bookshelf, I mean, I don't know who wouldn't immediately just go out and grab it and buy it like ASAP. So, this is your first book. Tell me how it was conceptualized. How did you come up with all of the concepts in the book? It's chock full of so many different concepts that toddlers go through. So, kind of walk me through that a little bit.
Absolutely. So there are just so many parents every day sending me emails, sending me DMs, asking the same questions over and over again, or asking, do you have a post on this? Do you have a post on that? And Instagram is not like a searchable platform, right? Like content from a month ago is completely buried. It's hard to find it. And I just realized parents were just spending so much time, really wasting a lot of time scrolling Instagram and Googling, trying to find answers to their questions, and that we didn't have one comprehensive, trusted resource for ages 1 to 5. But we have that for pregnancy. We have that for infancy, where you can just flip to a mini chapter and get your questions answered on whatever topic it is. So I created Transforming Toddlerhood to really be the first comprehensive, quick reference guide for parenting kids ages 1 to 5. And I've broken it down into 5 sections: the toddler parent, the toddler explained, the emotional toddler, the physical toddler, and the social toddler. And so we cover every challenge possible, whether you feel like you're going to yell or your parenting partner is not on board, you want to know how to decode behavior and how to set limits, or how to overcome any challenge like tantrums, potty training, screen time, parental preference, whining, independent play, all the things. I've got you covered.
I love it. You really do. I mean, I was flipping through it and I was just amazed. First of all, the book is just beautiful. It's beautifully done. I think the first chapter I want to talk about is chapter 31. It's stopping aggressive behavior. Because as a child therapist, I do deal a lot with the social emotional. So we will get to tantrums and some of the emotionality of children in that age group. But I think, I'm also a behavioral therapist and I work a lot with behaviors and parents that'll come to me and say, my child won't stop hitting me. My child won't stop biting me. My child won't stop, this or that, whatever the case may be. And, they're worried about it because they're hurting other people. They might be even hurting themselves, their siblings, you name it, friends at school, peers, the preschool calls them and says, can you come pick up your child? They just bit or hit someone else again, type thing. So where does that aggressive behavior come from your perspective? And what should parents do about it?
Yes. Well, and I even hate to call it aggressive behavior, but I use the word that parents use. So parents knew where to find the answers to their questions. But really, whether we call it aggressive behavior or defiant behavior, whatever you want to say, in the end, this is a child communicating. And I think that is the biggest thing, is that these behaviors that we get calls from about for preschool, or we see happen at play dates, or as siblings, or even our child does to us, we think, oh my gosh, my toddler is so bad. My toddler is going to grow up to be a bully, going to be rude. We start extrapolating all these things, but really this behavior is developmentally appropriate. And that's the biggest thing that I want parents to take away, is that the behaviors that drive us nuts and freak us out are usually developmentally appropriate. That's how young toddlers, especially 1 and 2 year olds, but even 3 and 4 year olds, communicate. And so once we know that, we can start working with the behavior in a different way versus coming from a fear based, this is bad behavior, we have to shut it down, because we don't actually want to shut down our child's communication. We want to give them better skills for communicating.
Right, exactly. And I completely agree with that. And I think it puts parents at ease when they can understand where the behaviors come from, or if it is developmentally appropriate, and some children do have it a little more than others. I mean, some children just temperament wise, personality wise, don't explain those behaviors as much. And sometimes I work with a lot of children on the spectrum, a lot of neurodivergent children who don't have the means to speak, like they are nonverbal, or they don't have the speech and language skills yet, or just don't have the communication skills that, that other kids might have at that particular age. And again, it's not even about the age, it's about the developmental level. And I think a lot of times parents forget that. And, kids need those skills. So teaching them those things. So let me ask you this question. So what should a parent do in that situation? Let me share a story that happened years ago. We were at a play date, and my daughter was playing with, and they were about, I would say not even 3 yet. They were probably about 2.5. And they were at a play date, and this little girl came up and just bit my daughter on the arm and left marks, like almost bleeding. Like it was deep enough where it was almost bleeding, definitely marks. It got red. You saw all the teeth. And the other parent of the biting child, just didn't do anything at all. Basically, just ignored the behavior, walked away. At most, maybe once I said something, said, "Oh, honey, you shouldn't do that." But that was it. So how do you rate how that parent reacted? How should a parent react in that? Because I think a lot of times parents, like you said, maybe get themselves worked up too much, and then they start, punishing the child, disciplining the child, shaming the child for doing that, or like I said, there's that gentle parenting approach where there's almost nothing done about it. And like, oh, they're just expressing themselves. Or they might say, oh, that's just developmentally appropriate. It's okay. Where do you chime in? And, what do you suggest parents do in that type of situation?
Yes, I'll speak from like both sides. And the one thing I want to say is that when it comes to gentle parenting, it's about being gentle with the emotions and feelings, not gentle with the limits. We still want to have very clear limits. And that's where we mess up because we think that it's our job to keep our kids happy. And when we set a limit, kids typically have big reactions. So we think now we're not being gentle because our kid's upset. But your kid getting upset still does nothing to do with you being a gentle parent or not. And when kids come up against limits, get upset, and then have a chance to come back to their emotional equilibrium, that is creating emotional resilience and those emotional regulation skills that they need. So, keeping that in mind, when you have a situation like this, if you are the parent and your child bites, this is an unsafe behavior. So, I recommend jumping in right away with something like, whoa, I won't let you bite. And you move your child or you get in between your child and the kid that they're biting. Then you want to turn to the child that was bitten and say, oh my goodness, are you okay? That must have hurt. I'm so sorry that happened. So you're modeling to your child how to take care of someone else in that moment. Then you want to go to your child and say, hey, are you okay? Because this is the thing. We cannot label the child who bit as the aggressor because we don't know what happened to trigger that. We might have been talking with our friend, not seeing the thing, right? Did your child's hair get pulled? Did that child take a toy from your child? We don't know what happened. So we want to check in with them and be like, hey, are you okay? What happened here? And then if your child's younger, they might not be able to say that's okay because receptive language comes before expressive language. So they're going to start getting the idea and understand you. And then you're going to say something like, biting hurts. We don't bite. It's not okay to bite. It's unsafe. And then you're going to say, what can you do next time you feel this way? And then practice something else. And you're going to say, how can we help your friend feel better? Because this is how we teach skills. So I just went through what I call the recipe for developmentally smart parenting, which is creating connection, setting limits and following through, and teaching skills. Now, say your child got bit. Now, what you want to do is empower your child in these moments to stand up for themselves in a way that is safe. So if your child gets bit, you come up to them and say, oh my gosh, are you okay? That must have hurt. Mommy's here, and help soothe them, create that connection. And then once they're calm again, you can teach the skills and you can say something like, next time someone bites you or someone's coming too close to you, you can say, stop, please. So you just do 2 words or even just 1 word, depending if they're really young, stop. And you also pair emotion with it. So your child starts to learn how to create a boundary that people won't cross.
Yeah, I love that. And I think the last part about teaching skills also teaches empathy, teaching children how to be empathetic, to other children, to other humans, which is a huge skill I feel like we definitely need these days in our world, right?
Yes.
And I think, a
Yes.
lot of parents are scared of setting those limits and those boundaries. And I'm a big person on that, especially like I said, in the clinical world and even in the book I'm writing, like I have a whole chapter on limits and boundaries. And I want to emphasize that because I feel like sometimes my experience, I have seen more often than not that parents are scared to set boundaries these days. I'm not sure what it is, if it's just a generational thing that's happening in our world or where it's really coming from. But have you seen that in your work, or have you seen a lot of parents almost, I said, maybe scared's too harsh of a word, but not setting those limits and boundaries? And why is that? And how can we tell parents that it's okay? Like that's part of, raising your children in an effective way.
Yes, absolutely. This is why in my book I have the chapter on setting limits, but really I have a chapter on discipline and then a chapter on each one of those tenets of how to do that developmentally smart discipline, and a chapter on your role as a parent. Because here's what it comes down to: what I was saying before about gentle parenting. We have a whole generation of parents that don't want to parent the way that they were parented. And we have a whole generation of parents that are very cognizant about feelings and emotions and want to raise emotionally healthy kids.
Right.
But that gets convoluted with this idea that for a child to be emotionally healthy, they have to be happy all the time, which is why we're more nervous to set a limit. And I go through this in the limits chapter. We, as the adult, have three jobs when setting a limit, and our child has three jobs. And it's kind of like a game of ping pong or pickleball, whatever you want to envision it as. So
Right.
it's our job to set the limit. It's our child's job to test it, because toddlers are wired to test limits as they become their own independent individual. It's our job to follow through on the limit. It's our child's job to get upset when they realize that limit isn't budging. And that might look like crying and kicking and hitting and all the things. But that is how a child processes the limit and accepts it. It is your job to support your child in their big feelings and emotions while still upholding that limit. It's your child's job to accept it. You cannot make your child accept a limit. They have to decide to do that, but you can support them as they process it. So if your child has a reaction when you set a limit, you are not a bad parent. You are not messing them up. Children need limits to feel safe and secure. We have to create the container and give them freedom inside of the container that we create. And this is the difference between being what I call the controlling commander or the permissive pushover, getting off of that continuum and being in charge as the confident leader and guide. And that's what I talk about in understanding your role as the parent chapter, that really illustrates this and takes you through examples to understand how it plays out.
Yeah, I love that. I love it that we're so like-minded in that, because it's so refreshing to talk to someone who actually like literally knows how to explain that to other parents and practices that too. I think it's so important. So usually the next question after that I get from parents is, well, how should I discipline? Because there's been plenty of parents I've worked with that come to me with all these behavioral problems, challenges they're having at home with their child, and say, help me, give me tools. I don't know what to do. And they'll talk about discipline and they'll say, well, I'll ask them what they do. Like, well, what happens if your child breaks a boundary or breaks a rule? And a lot of times parents will say that they don't do anything. They might get yelled at or something, or, something simple, but there's really, like I said, no follow up of the discipline. And I do believe there's a big difference between discipline and punishment. And like I said, there's a whole spectrum of things. And a lot of times parents just go to timeouts, especially at that toddler age. I feel like in that 1 to 5 age, it's about timeouts. How do you feel about timeouts? I know it's become controversial. And if you don't suggest a timeout, what maybe quick tips do you have for parents in this age group that talks about how to discipline a child and set that limit or boundary, and what that actually looks like if you're not going to do a timeout? What are the suggestions maybe that you talk about in your book?
Yes, absolutely. So I just want to say, well, two things to start this is that first, discipline does not mean punishment. We often confuse it with punishment, but really the goal here is to learn skills for impulse control and emotional regulation, behavior regulation. That's what we're going for here. So, really, your child does not have a punishment deficit. They have a skill deficit. So instead of asking yourself, what punishment, what consequence does my child need for this behavior? What we need to ask ourselves is, what support does my child need in meeting this limit that I set? What skill does my child need to learn to be successful here? When we start asking ourselves these questions, discipline becomes a lot easier. So then, when you have a child who's having a hard time and having a behavior that's either unsafe or just unacceptable in that moment, we don't have to yell at them. We don't have to put them in timeout. What we have to do is go through the recipe for developmentally smart discipline, which is create that connection, meet them where they're at, and get curious about that behavior. I see you throwing blocks. What are you trying to tell me? Because all behavior is communications, communicating feelings, emotions, needs, sensory needs, basic needs, developmental needs, all of these things. And then you're going to want to set a limit. It's okay to feel frustrated. It is not okay to throw blocks. That is
Mhm.
unsafe. I'm going to put the blocks away. And then once your child has calmed down, because they're going to get real upset, put away the blocks. You say, we can try again in a few minutes, but right now they're going away. And then you teach skills. Next time you feel this way, what can you do? And then once they're calm, you'd be like, okay, let's try again with those blocks, because here's the thing. We have to be the leader and guide. We have to create the container. But why this is so hard for parents and it feels easier just to put them in timeout or to yell is because it's hard to have the capacity to be with all of those big feelings and emotions when we set the limit, especially when we're trying to deal with our own big feelings and emotions. So we're like in emotion
Right.
overload and it's really hard. And I fully want to recognize that this parenting in this way takes a lot more work up front because we're
Mhm.
likely going to need to reparent ourselves as we're parenting our kids, but it's going to have payouts that are exponentially greater in the long run.
Yeah, I agree. And it does take a lot more time up front. But once you have those skills, it becomes a lot more naturally done over time, right? As you're parenting. So
And
I know you
behavior
mentioned
transforms because we're actually, addressing what's creating the behavior, not just the behavior on the surface. And that's what truly transforms the behavior because we're teaching the skills and giving the support for kids to be able to do better next time.
exactly, exactly. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about tantrums because I know that's a big a big hot topic when it comes to the 1 to 5 age group and especially toddlers specifically. Although I just did a podcast episode recently about tantrums throughout the years because I do see a lot of even defiance, later on, as they grow. And just, the child, if you have a child that, is defiant to the point where you go through the steps, that you go through what you just mentioned, and then they take the block and then they just look you right in the eye and throw it anyway, like right at you. Like there's definitely, some, like I said, every child is different and, can be like that, or they can accept it, or like you said, they might get upset and they might cry and they might kick and scream, and that's not necessarily something to be scared of, right? So, but how should a parent handle a tantrum? Because when a child's stress levels are so high, you can't necessarily intervene in the middle of it. As they're crying, you can't really have a sit down with them and say, okay, so when should a parent intervene and how should they react when their child is having a tantrum? Especially, I hear a lot of parents are concerned when this happens in a public place, when they're in the middle of Target or at the post office or at the grocery store. What are your suggestions on that specifically when it comes to tantrum behavior and when they're right in the middle of that emotional dysregulation?
Yes. First of all, we are our own worst critic. So if this is happening in a public place, it is human nature for people to be curious. We as humans are curious and we cannot turn it off. This is why reality TV got so big once it started, right? We are just curious human beings. We can't help ourselves. Okay. And we're our own worst critic. If someone out there who is curious is actually judging you too, that's on them. That's all about their baggage. That's about their upbringing, their life experiences, has nothing to do with you and your kiddo. They're just feeling triggered. That's not on you. So give yourself some compassion. Give your child some compassion. You're both human beings doing your best in this moment. When to intervene? It's important to create safety. In tantrums in general, tantrums less is more. But you need to intervene if it's unsafe. If your child's doing like a back flip, like a back arch in the cart, and they're about to like flip out onto the floor, yeah, we got to like intervene there. Or if they're on the ground and they're about to knock into a display or hit their head, we've got to intervene. So we need to intervene to create that physical safety. If physical safety is there, we don't need to do anything with our kiddo. Then we got to work on the emotional safety piece, which is on us, which is basically just working to ground ourselves, validate our own feelings and emotions, really work on our parenting mindset in the moment, all of these things that help disrupt the stress response and just walk us back to our upper brains. Take a deep breath, right? Now, if you're unable to do that in a public place, it's okay. Abandon your cart. Abandon your cart in the aisle. Abandon your cart up front. Take your kiddo out. Sometimes fresh air will be enough. Sometimes you might need to go to the car. Sometimes you might have to go home, and you always want to think about what's behind this. Is your child hungry? Is your child tired? What's going on here? Are their needs met? But basically, less is more in this moment. You just want to create that safety, create that connection, make sure you're upholding the limit. And that's about all you can do because, again, you can't make your child feel a certain way. Now, if your child's just sitting there waiting for something, the other day, my son really wanted a mango bar from the pantry. And I'm like your lunch is still sitting here. We're not doing this. And so I said he couldn't. And I stood in front of the pantry door, shut it. He got real upset. And then I realized the longer I stood there, he was just ramping up. And he's like, oh, he's wondering if he gets really upset if I'll just change my mind because I don't want to hear this anymore. So I walked away. I brought his plate of food over with me to the ground, got out his train set, turned on his little Tony box, started setting up his train. Literally 30 seconds later, he sits down right beside me, picks up a train and a bite of food, and there we go. We had moved on. So sometimes we have to be willing to move on to help our kids move on. If we're waiting for them to make them first move, we could be sitting there a long time.
Yeah. Well, as a play therapist, you just spoke my language. I
Uh,
always recommend, starting with play, and it does. It transforms behavior, it modifies behavior, it grows that connection, and it's so magical. I love it. But we'll save that for another time. But I love that, and I was going to share a story too that when it comes to the store, and you alluded to it by taking that deep breath. And that's something I used to do when my children were younger and they were, more in that 1 to 5 age range, is I would start taking a deep breath just on my own. I didn't tell them to. I didn't say, okay, now take a deep breath. I didn't really even engage with them. I just sat with the cart and I started just doing deep breaths. And they would watch me. Again, it goes to that role modeling. And they would watch me and then they would start doing a deep breath too. Because they probably thought it looked fun and they were intrigued by it. And again, you can make it more playful for kids that age, and whatnot. But it does help. That role modeling does help, and I think when we're more regulated, then our children are going to be more regulated. Is that what you find in your work too?
Absolutely. And there's the science to back it up, right? And in my book, in the brain development chapter, I talk about this concept of emotional contagion, which is, basically how our emotions are contagious and how mirror neurons work. And so, really, kids pick up on how we are. The adults in the home are like the nervous system of the home. And so that can feel like a lot of pressure. So just everyone who's out there listening, like, oh my gosh, well, like I'm burnout and flipping out and all the things. You don't have to do it perfectly. Okay. You don't
Yeah.
have to be perfect at this. But the more that you can work on calming your own nervous system, grounding yourself, it's going to make a difference in how your children respond.
Exactly. And that brings me to my very last question about apologies. Because I know that's kind of a hot topic these days too. And there's kind of a couple different camps of how people feel about it. But like you said, we don't have to be perfect all the time. And we are going to get in bad moods. We're human beings, or we are going to maybe yell at our kids unprecedented because we're in a bad mood or something happened at work that earlier that day or with our spouse or whatever it is. And so a lot of times, what I'll do is I'll go back later and, because then we're like, why are our kids acting up? And we're like, oh, we're in a bad mood. So we're taking it more personally or getting more offended by their behavior because we're not regulated. But, a lot of times I'll go back and I'll apologize to my kids and say, I'm so sorry. Mommy just had a bad day. I had a bad moment. And I'll also role model that type of behavior of being humble, being able to apologize. But I know there's, like I said, different feelings about apologies and if kids should be kind of forced to apologize. That's probably a little harsh way of saying it. But again, I see it all the time everywhere I go. I'll see a kid act up in some way and the parent just automatically, it's almost just like an instant response. They'll say, apologize to your brother, apologize to this. And I'm always kind of taken aback a little bit and I always want to intervene, but I can't, right? I mean, I can't just go up to people at Disneyland and say, hey, you shouldn't do that, But how do you feel about apologies as we're wrapping up here? And just what parents should do if there is a behavior that is done, let's say go back into the biting. Should a child apologize in that moment? Should there be some sort of apology later on? Should a parent even suggest it? How do you feel about that?
Absolutely. So I've had a post go viral on Instagram before that basically says something like forcing your child to apologize is essentially teaching your child to lie, because forced apologies are more for the adult to make an adult feel better with our feelings of embarrassment over our child's behavior than what it does for the child, because children are not learning authentic empathy. They're not learning how to repair relationships when they make mistakes when we're forcing them to apologize. So instead of forcing apologies, what I would recommend parents focus on is to make amends. And I kind of modeled that a little bit early in the conversation about when we were talking about biting, and I showed how to check in on the other child. When we model checking in on a child or apologizing, whether we are modeling it for our child with something that they did, especially for a young toddler, or when we mess up and we do it, or we apologize to our parenting partner and our kid sees it. All of these modeling moments is teaching your child the skill of making amends. These are relationship skills. And this is why children do not need a perfect parent, because if you aren't out there modeling these skills, kids aren't going to learn these skills, right? So that's what they need. Also, reading books about these skills are really helpful as well for everyone. So focus on making amends, which also you can model it. The other thing you can do is say, how can we help your friend feel better? So that is a collaborative way to get your child involved in repairing the relationship, because that's where the true learning happens, and your child's going to carry that moment forward instead of just people pleasing you to like be done with the conversation and get back to playing.
Right. We agree on that. I love that. I love that you talk about it. Now, I know we only scratched the surface of your new book, which comes out tomorrow, Tuesday. Everyone needs to get it now. You can pre-sale it like literally today after you hear this episode. There's a link in the podcast notes, and I'll share a link on Instagram as well. But you can get it. And then if you buy it today, it may even ship by tomorrow, which is when it comes out. So either way, you'll get it, as soon as possible. But Amazon, I think, would be a great place to buy. I know you have your website and there's lots of different retailers on there. Anything else you want to say with your pub days coming tomorrow?
Yes. Oh my gosh. I'm so excited. And I just want to say that, this is the book that I needed as a toddler parent. I don't have the bandwidth to read 25 pages in a chapter to try to find the answers to my questions. I wanted this to be the place that parents could just have a book, not to read cover to cover, but just to have as their parenting companion to turn to when the going gets tough. So I really hope that you'll pick it up. And if you want to see all the retailers, which you can buy it wherever books are sold, you can also go to transformingtoddlerhood.com/book. And if you want to continue the conversation, come find me on Instagram at transformingtoddlerhood and send me a DM.
I love that. Well, everyone should do that. Look how thick this book is. I mean, this book is so thick. And again, we just scratched the surface. There is so much more to your book, and I am so excited about it. I work with the 1 to 5 age range in my private practice, and I can't wait to learn more tips on here from you. So, everyone, go out and buy the book. And thank you, Devin, again for joining me today on the podcast.
Thank you very much.